to talk about...
You're listening to the official Reformed Stoic podcast, covering politics, philosophy, theology, conspiracy theories. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this life. Are you? Join Wolfgang, Sketty Squad, Purity Gang, as we strive to take dominion over this dying planet. I am Reformed Stoic, and this is my podcast. Woo! Let's get it. Rug's climbing the chair. Let's get it, Grug. Whoa, Rug's running. Every time you crank, everywhere you spank, every time you crank, every move you spank, I'll be skitting it. We got a great show for you today, guys. Who's ready for red pills? We're going to go over Malthusianism a little bit. And then today we're going to be mature, we're going to be big boys, and we're going to watch Biden's entire address to the nation. Kind of a special segment. We usually, get like 4 or 5 news clips and then read an article. For today, we are just going to take that entire second segment and watch Biden's entire address to the nation. He's our president. We're staying informed. We gonna learn big time. And then a little bit about being a Christian and science. Christianity versus science. The power of looking at a rock under a microscope. All right, guys. Well, I hope you guys have been having an all right day. Got a little drumming in. Did my calisthenics circuit. Shadow box for 5 rounds. Sipping on my drink. Picked up some groceries today. Definitely going to have to pick up some weed here pretty soon. Assuming I want to stay the path of smoking it. And I kind of do. But, yeah, life is going. Things are all right. So, without further ado, let's get to it. News segment. The Reformed Stoic News segment. Let's go! They all get smeared. That's right. So let's get nice and comfy. Today we're starting out with our little buddy over at Crash Course History, Population, Sustainability, and Malthus, Crash Course World History 215. This guy's going to give us a little intro on Malthusianism. So let's do it.
I'm John Green, this is Crash Course World History, and today we're talking about one of my least favorite subjects, the end of humanity.
Mr. Green, does that mean that you can see the future? If so, how do things work out with Amanda Key?
Oh, me from the past. The phrase work out implies that there was a relationship to work out, which there wasn't, and there will never be. However, you do currently know your eventual wife, but I'm not telling you who she is, because if I do, you will screw it up.
Soy, 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 soy. What the?
So we're not going to look at the actual end of humanity today. We're going to learn about a theory about the downfall of civilization. And unlike all the true theories, this one doesn't involve aliens or robot aliens, but it is related to environmental catastrophes of the man-made variety. Today we're going to look at population and the most persistent theory about population growth and its effect on humanity, the one proposed by Thomas Malthus. And what's amazing about the persistence of this theory is its complete lack of connection to actual human history. All right, so in 10,000 BCE, fewer than 1 billion people lived on Earth. Nearly 12,000 years later, around 1800 CE, human population had grown to still under 1 billion. And about that time, an Anglican minister named Thomas Malthus wrote an essay on the principle of population that explained why this slow population growth was the way.
The eternal Anglican. It definitely seems like there was a lot of early elitist people who were part of the Anglican Church. Gonna have to take the Anglican pill at some point. I mean, I kind of mixed feelings about it. Sometimes the Anglican Church sounds kind of based, but sometimes not so much. I'm thinking not so much overall.
Things were always going to be. Malthus saw the growing number of poor people on the English streets, and he did what any reasonable thinker would do. He analogized them to rabbits. He reasoned that the same forces that checked the population of rabbits would limit humans too: predators, harsh weather, epidemics, and starvation. Now, it turns out that humans have ways of dealing with predators. We killed all the lions. And also, we've got this amazing way of dealing with harsh weather that rabbits have never figured out, called clothes. Not to even get into fire and housing. So that leaves us with alien predators, disease, and starvation as the big obstacles. Okay, we're going to address these one at a time. First, Arnold Schwarzenegger already took care of the alien predators. Thank you, Mr. Schwarzenegger. In exchange, we made you governor of California. Then we have disease. So around the time Malthus was writing, disease was becoming less dangerous to human populations. And then there's starvation, right? Well, we've argued in the past that starvation is generally a man-made problem, but to Malthus, it was still a natural disaster. For Malthus, uncontrolled reproduction was the central problem. Remember, he was, coming from the context of rabbits. He explained it through math. Humans could reproduce geometrically, capable of doubling population every 25 years. But land on Earth is finite, and at best it could only be coaxed into producing small arithmetic increases in food. So you've got population growing geometrically, food growing arithmetically, all the people are gonna die. Now, among simpler creatures, the theory went, food shortages caused immediate famine, but humans would continue to eke out ever more desperate lives as increasing demand raised the price of food and clothing and bread and medicine. Powerful individuals and nations would seize the assets of the weak, but even some of the strong would fall victim to hunger and disease. Inevitably, the population would then dip low enough for the land to recover, giving another generation a chance to repeat the same mistakes. Over time, then, human population would remain roughly constant with the natural fertility of the land. Because he was such a fun guy, Malthus called this theory of history the cycle of misery. This essay is one of the most influential pieces of writing in history, along with a handful of other works that established the methods and importance of the modern field of economics. It opened the door to the universe of evolutionary science, and most immediately, Malthusian theory played a devastating role in the Irish potato famine of 1846 to 1851. Let's go to the sure-to-be-depressing thought bubble. Nearly 1 million Irish people died of starvation, disease, and violence during the famine, which was triggered when a fungus wiped out the one strain of potato grown in Ireland. Had Ireland's poor population had access to the thousands of other varieties of potato or aid to purchase more expensive crops, the suffering may not have been as terrible. But official English policy toward Ireland, as determined by its colonial master Charles Trevelyan, was to give no aid nor allow anyone else to give it either. He blocked American ships filled with corn from reaching the island. He allowed Irish farms that grew crops other than potatoes to sell them straight to England. Now, hundreds of years of anti-Irish Catholic hatred were the roots of England's cruel policies, but Malthusian theory also played a role. In the century before 1846, Ireland's population had grown significantly.
Malthusian theory and anti-Irish Catholics, guys. So that is just an example of, like, what this is really about. Like, they really want people to fucking die. They really want the population to shrink. And ultimately, they caused the problem with their Industrial Revolution. So this is kind of what we're dealing with right now, guys. The whole Depop agenda that's going on. Look, to me, you ask me, fentanyl's a bait and switch. They did the opiate epidemic, and then they switch out the heroin for fentanyl. People are dropping like fucking flies. COVID, people dropping like flies. Come on, man. Sudden adult death syndrome. Homosexual agenda. I mean, it might get a little bit too spicy and based here if I keep listing this stuff off, but this shit is at play right now, guys. This is part of their deal. These people, these kind of thoughts were coming out of Cambridge University. We'll go over that later. This is elite population management type thinking.
And many English thinkers saw the famine as an outcome of Malthus's predictions. From this point of view, providing food or aid to the Irish was futile. It could only delay the cycle of misery until its downward swing sighed down.
That cartoon was funny, dude.
Even more people. Trevelyan thus felt assured of pronouncing that the only remedy for the starving was for them to die and let their corpses serve to remind the survivors not to have sex. Quote, "The judgment of God sent the calamity to teach the Irish a lesson, and that calamity must not be too much mitigated," Trevelyan reassured people upset about the news of starving children. "The real evil with which we have to contend is not the physical evil of the famine, but the moral evil of the selfish, perverse, and turbulent character of the people." Thanks, Thought Bubble. So why did Ireland want independence in the first place? Oh, right, yeah, that. So by 1852, emigration and starvation had shrunk the population of Ireland from about 6.5 million to 4 million. In 2010, the island's population was still lower than at the famine's start, so Malthusian theory seemed to have its airtight proof, right? Well, no. In fact, even as Malthus was writing, the curve of human population growth was beginning to slope upward. The increase in population was so gradual that all Malthus noticed of it were the outliers, the poor clinging to life. But the growth in the number of human beings was far more permanent than Malthus ever imagined. In fact, it was unstoppable. From 1750 to 1850, right when Malthus was alive, the number of humans on Earth grew by 500 million people, from about 800 million to 1.3 billion. By 1960, the population reached 3 billion, and since then,
I like Catholics, bro, but y'all gotta understand the Pope is not really the vicar of Christ on earth.
The world has added 1 billion humans roughly every 15 years. Sometime in 2009 or 2010, the United Nations estimates that the Earth's 7 billionth person was born. And consider that contrast. At the very moment that Malthus was writing that it was impossible, human population was beginning its rocket-like acceleration. So what did he miss? Well, Malthus was like an A+ student in the subject of human existence. He was right for like 95% of history, but it turns out grades aren't a super accurate predictor of success in life. Malthus should have looked past prominent disasters like the potato famine and recognized that 2 major revolutions in food production were occurring while he was alive. One of the reasons that he struck out so spectacularly is that, like many Western thinkers, he wasn't paying attention to China. So Chinese farmers had altered the land and used a number of inventions like dikes and paddle wheels and bicycle chains to grow rice in man-made paddies. It took a lot of labor, but it paid off, especially when they discovered that by using the entrails and bones of the fish that swam in the water, they could get, fertilizer. And then they could grow 2 rice crops in 1 year. Thus, the secret of China's greatness. food. And with the benefit of added surplus, fortunate people in China were able to free up their time to study and to invent. Yet, while the birth of this system had begun in the ancient past, additions to it continued throughout Chinese history and progressed straight through the Qing dynasty. But agriculture was also changing in Europe during Malthus's lifetime. Like there's Jethro Tull's seed press, the crop rotation system developed by Charles Turnip Townsend, and animal husbandry practiced by scientific farmers such as Robert Blakewell, who increased the size of his sheep by selective breeding. So it kind of seems impossible that Malthus could have missed this revolution because he could see it from his house in Surrey, England. But from his perspective, that agricultural revolution had the opposite effect of what had happened in China. Like instead of giving people more food and more comfort, it seemed to Malthus that it was driving them to greater misery. That's because for lots of Europeans, the agricultural revolution was largely about evictions. The most important innovation of Europe's agricultural revolution was largely invisible. It was the decision to treat land as private property. So for most Europeans, the concept that individual humans could own, land was a foreign concept. Even as late as 1500, most of Europe conceived of land as rightly belonging solely to its creator, God. And then gods anointed on earth, kings and the church, could parcel out packets of land to people they chose, but any land not specifically granted to a landlord remained open to anyone who wanted to use it. This open land was called the commons, and in parts of Europe it made up more than half of the territory. But then, around 1100 CE, British monarchs found themselves perpetually strapped for cash, and they needed new taxes. So in return for voting for tax increases and gifts, the crown granted enclosure acts to rich Englishmen, giving them the right to fence off the commons and claim it as their own. So the people who'd used that land to graze animals or cut wood or grow crops could be forced off of it, and for the first time, richer people could maintain miles of fenced-in property to pasture their sheep or dig mines. Meanwhile, the dispossessed, deprived of their opportunity to grow or hunt their own food, turned to beggary and theft, and to London, where they hired out their labor for wages. Wages? That's not how humans should live, having to fill out time cards and punch clocks. Wait, Stan, don't you make wages? Oh, it's horrible. Myself, I live off the land. If I can't grow it, I won't eat it. So by the time Malthus was a young man, things weren't great for the poor and dispossessed. So it's a small wonder that Malthus only saw the downside of the agricultural revolution. Only through historical hindsight do we know that private property accelerated incentives to experiment with new methods of food production, which dramatically increased the amount of food produced. Like before enclosure, it wouldn't have made sense for someone to buy a seed press and plant neat rows of seeds because anybody with a cow could have trampled on them an hour later. The lower food prices created by more food supply began to ease the cycle of misery that Malthus described, although only just barely. So in fact, agricultural innovations proved that Malthus was almost entirely wrong. So why is he still influential? I think because there's a very seductive logic to the idea that resources, especially food, are finite. I mean, we live on one planet that has a certain amount of arable land, and surely at some point humans will suck up all of the resources. And this is especially true in the age of global climate change. In 2014, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report that warned of the potential for warmer temperatures to restrict food supplies in the face of growing demand. In fact, it claimed that rising temperatures had already diminished wheat production by 2% per decade, while demand for food was rising at 14% over the same period. Food prices, which had been declining steadily until 2007, have been volatile since then, sometimes leading to famine, other times to political unrest. And those are real problems that may yet prove disastrous. But other doom and gloom scenarios regarding population and food, most notably the 1968 book The Population Bomb, have proven wrong at least so far. In fact, fewer people will die of starvation this year than died 500 years ago of starvation, even though we have far more people on Earth. And there's still lots of room to improve agricultural yields. But simply knowing that Malthus was wrong isn't as interesting as thinking about why he was wrong. Malthus underestimated how...
See, so even this normie agrees that Malthus was wrong. Overpopulation is a liberal lie for the most part. Now, I mean, ultimately, the only reason the population shot up so much is because of the Industrial Revolution. So the population is at somewhat unnatural numbers, but ultimately overpopulation is an elite lie, and the left embraces it.
successful we would be at adapting to environmental constraints, and he underestimated the role that technology and innovation could play in creating a world where more humans could live. Now, of course, that hasn't come without its costs, including climate change. And that's why I think Malthus remains so influential. Human existence is not a zero-sum game. It is possible for me to benefit and other people also to benefit. But it's also true that many resources that we imagine as infinite aren't. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is filmed here in the Chad and Stacy Emig-Holt studio in Indianapolis, and it's possible.
Woo! I can't help but think of someone seeing Crash Course hundreds of years from now. I'm sorry. I can't help but think of someone seeing Crash Course hundreds of years from now, seeing the Arnold Schwarzenegger bit and frantically tearing through their history books to find out about the alien invasion their parents never told them about. Cringe, soy. Really interesting video. I think as an addition, it's worth noting that distribution of food is really a far greater problem currently than production of food. Also, the Irish potato famine has to be one of the most shameful moments of British history. Bad Anglos. I have to say, this channel has been a godsend for me this university semester, so much more informative and interesting than reading through textbooks, and actually taught with humor and energy. We do actually produce about 11 billion people's worth of food. It's just that it's distributed very unevenly. All right, well, let's keep on cranking it. This is a very short one, so that was very lengthy. Now let's see it summarized in about 2 minutes. 1 minute economics. Thomas Malthus, Malthusianism. Does population growth lead to food shortages and resource depletion?
Back in 1804, there were roughly 1 billion people on this planet. Today, just a little over 200 years later, there are over 7.5 billion of us. Also, roughly 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. Oh, and all it took was 40 years for our water use to quadruple. It's also worth mentioning that we depend on just 12 plants and 5 animal species for 75% of our food, and these are just 4 examples of facts one can consider worrisome. One of the most vocal personalities when it comes to worrying about population growth was Thomas Malthus, who believed that population growth can be exponential, whereas food supply growth is arithmetic at best. Progress in fields such as agriculture, however, ended up proving him wrong. There are still thought currents such as neo-Malthusianism, which revolve around the idea that if population growth gets out of hand, humanity will deal with issues such as resource depletion, pollution, making the world inhospitable, and so on. On the one hand, Malthusian concerns aren't 100% unfounded, because 1. Human progress didn't come without price tags, for example pollution. 2. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results, or just because these scenarios haven't manifested themselves thus far, it doesn't mean it can never happen. However, critics do tend to hold the upper hand because 1. Technological advances make it clear that humans are a creative bunch. 2. Birth control is definitely mainstream these days. 3. History has, so far, proven Malthusian thinkers wrong. Even if this doesn't guarantee anything about the future, it's an argument that counts quite a bit. 4. People aren't just resource consumers. Having a higher population also means having more producers, innovators, and so on. All in all, while Malthusian thinking may not be the most compelling approach, we shouldn't blindly dismiss everything that has to do with it.
All right, just a quick little rundown there. Fuego. I could go 3 minutes though, but I get what you're trying to do here. Really great topic. You should do one about the debate value of Malthusian economics. Not only was Malthus correct, but he was also short-sighted. He missed a large opportunity. So much of today's misconceptions could have been avoided if Malthus would have simplified his work so as to let the less mentally stimulated learn from his writings. Cringe. Nobody has proven him wrong. We have just used our brains to delay the inevitable. A lot of cringe coming from this comment section. All right, and then finally, the Malthusian argument. Development economics, the Malthusian argument. All right, 6 minutes. I have a feeling this is going to be fancy. Let's go.
One common argument for economic pessimism stems from the fear of increasing population. Let's take a look at this argument and see if it's true. The Reverend Thomas Robert Malthus published his famous book, An Essay on the Principle of Population, first edition 1798. This book remains extremely influential today. In the basic argument, Malthus suggests that there are diminishing returns to land. That is, if we add more workers to the land produces smaller and smaller amounts of additional value. This means, for instance, that if population doubles and we imagine twice the number of people working on the land, we don't produce twice as much food. So a doubling of the population would mean that each person actually has less food than before compared to the lower population. Now imagine that a technological improvement comes along and people are somewhat wealthier. In this situation, there will be, according to Malthus, a greater number of people. People will live longer, and they also will have more resources to support a greater number of children. Fewer children, for instance, will die in infancy. That means a growing population. But if you accept Malthus's assumption of diminishing returns to land and the notion of a fixed supply of land, not all is well. The growing population means less food for each person. Over time, the population will shrink again because there will be less food to support children, less food to support people in their old age, and living standards will eventually fall. The basic point is that at first something good happens, then population goes up because of the good news, but in the longer run, that new and larger population brings you back down to a lower standard of living. Those are the basic mechanics of the Malthusian model. Just to review those assumptions written down, there's a fixed and vital factor of production, land. There are diminishing returns on that factor. Income determines population growth. Rising wages mean higher survival rates, but higher survival rates eventually push wages back down. In the Malthusian model, a lot of policies which might appear to help the poor actually don't help the poor at all. For instance, imagine a vaccination program which limits some kind of disease. In the short run, of course, this will make the poor people healthier. But in the Malthusian model, in the longer run, you end up with a greater number of poor people because fewer of them are dying and living standards collapse once again. This seems counterintuitive and indeed...
So I guess we better alter the vaccine somehow, right? That would be the natural solution to that, would it not? Aha!
As we'll see, it's probably false, but nonetheless, this anecdote is one way of thinking through what the Malthusian model would actually mean in practice. There is some evidence that a version of the Malthusian model may help us explain earlier periods in world history. For instance, if we take a typical European living standard during the time of the Roman Empire and compare it to a typical European living standard in, say, the year 1700, it's not clear that there was much progress, if indeed any progress at all. Net sustainable economic growth was slow during virtually all of this period, and many regions of the world retrogressed. We don't have the data to say for sure that Malthus was right about this period, but at the very least, the sense we have from the data we do have is consistent with a Malthusian model. Since the industrial revolutions of the 19th century, the Malthusian model seems to be mostly or even completely false. For instance, take the country of Japan. It really does have a fixed supply of land. Improvements in technology have kept the Japanese standard of living very high, well above subsistence, and rather than just multiplying numbers endlessly, in fact, the birth rate in Japan has fallen dramatically. The population of Japan actually is shrinking and living standards remain high, even though at the moment the rate of economic growth is fairly low. It's interesting, but in 1800, Malthus himself wrote about China and Japan, and he wrote, I quote, "From the accounts we have in China and Japan, it may be fairly doubted whether the best directed efforts of human industry could double the produce of these countries even once in any number of years." Of course, what we saw in the late 20th century is that the economic produce of Japan could double in about 10 years' time, and the economic produce of China could double in about 7 years' time and stay there. On these issues, Malthus was quite simply wrong. What about Africa? Might the Malthusian model be true for Africa today? Development economist Charles Kenny set out to study exactly this question, and he looked at data from 46 different African countries. Keep in mind the Malthusian predictions. The first is that rising GDP per capita should lead to a rising population. The second is that a rising population should lead to falling GDP per capita. But of the 46 African countries Kenny looked at, those Malthusian correlations were found in only 13 of them, and only in 4 of those 13 cases were the correlations even marginally strong, defined by Kenny as greater than 0.3. That suggests that for the most part, even for Africa, the Malthusian model today is false. The Malthusian model is perhaps best thought of as a kind of challenge which the world must face, but not as a good description of how the world actually works, at least not today. For further readings on this topic, you can Google Thomas Robert Malthus. You can even read Malthus's essay online if you want. And for the more modern take, using data, please Google Charles Kenny Malthusian Trap.
All right, so this is just a good concept to know because, yeah, this is the origins of the elite's depopulation plot, and it is very much in effect in very many ways. Okay, so all we have left now is a couple of Wikipedia entries. We got one on Malthusianism. I feel like we've covered this. So let's take a look at Neo-Malthusianism real quick. It is the advocacy of human population planning to ensure resources and environmental integrities for current and future human populations as well as for other species. In Britain, the term Malthusian can also refer more specifically to arguments made in favor of preventative birth control, hence organizations such as the Malthusian League. Neo-Malthusians differ from Malthus theories mainly in their support for the use of contraception. Malthus, a devout Christian, believed that self-control, i.e. abstinence, was preferable to artificial birth control. He also worried that the effect of contraceptive use would be too powerful in curbing growth, conflicting with the common 18th century perspective to which Malthus himself adhered, that a steadily growing population remained a necessary factor in the continuing progress of society. Generally, modern neo-Malthusians are generally more concerned than Malthus with environmental degradation and catastrophic famine than with poverty. So it obviously became more secularized, more liberal, less Christian over time. Contraceptives, birth control, that was a big thing with Vatican II. Pre-Vatican II, Catholics were against birth control. And, that was a big momentum of the changing culture, and it made way for the free love movement. Georgists, Marxists, socialists, libertarians, free market enthusiasts, feminists, and human rights advocates have all given criticism to the Malthusianist theory. Interesting. It's pretty in line with all of that stuff now at this point. All right, let's take a look at Thomas Robert Malthus himself. He was born, 1766, and then died 1834. He was an English cleric, scholar, and influential economist in the fields of political economy and demography. Wrote an essay on the principle of population. Malthus observed that an increase in a nation's food production improved the well-being of the population. But the improvement was temporary because it led to population growth. Okay, pretty standard. Let's take a look at his early life and education. He was the sixth of seven children of Daniel Malthus and Henrietta Catherine, daughter of Daniel Graham, apothecary to Kings George II and George III, and granddaughter of Thomas Graham, apothecary to Kings George I and George II. Interesting. Henrietta was depicted alongside her siblings in William Hogarth's painting, The Graham Children. That was in 1742. Malthus was born at the Rookery, a small, elegant mansion at Westcott. Okay. So, sounds like he comes from money. Let's go down here a little bit. William Peterson and John Maynard Keynes described Daniel Malthus as a gentleman of good family and independent means, and a friend of David Hume and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Aha, so Hume, an empiricist, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, an Enlightenment actually Rousseau. Yeah. Genevan philosopher, writer, and composer. His political philosophy influenced the progress of the Age of Enlightenment. Yeah, Enlightenment philosopher. Daniel Malthus was son of Sydenham Malthus, who was a clerk of Chancery and director of the South Sea Company. He was also proprietor of several landed properties in the home counties and Cambridgeshire. Sydenham Malthus's father, Daniel, had been apothecary to King William and later to Queen Anne. Daniel's father, Reverend Robert Malthus, was appointed vicar of Northolt, Middlesex, under the regicide Cromwell, but evicted at the Restoration. He was described as an ancient divine, a man of strong reason and mighty in the scriptures, of great eloquence and fervor, though defective in elocution, due to a very great impediment in his utterance, which has been concluded to be likely to have been a cleft palate. The young Malthus received his education at the Warrington Academy from 1782, where he was taught by Gilbert Wakefield, English scholar and controversialist. Okay. Warrington was a dissenting academy which closed in 1783. Malthus continued for a period to be tutored by Wakefield at the latter's home in Bramcote, Nottinghamshire. Malthus entered Jesus College, Cambridge, a constituent college of the University of Cambridge. The college's full name is the College of the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. John the Evangelist, and the Glorious Virgin St. Radegund near Cambridge. So this is like a Catholic branch of Cambridge, which this is elite. This is elite education, elite family. This guy is an early elite, more or less. Well, more, not less. Ninth Wrangler in mathematics. His tutor was William Friend. Took the MA degree in 1791. Was elected a Fellow of Jesus College 2 years later. In 1789, he took orders in the Church of England and became a curate at Oakwood Chapel in the parish of Wotton, Surrey. All right. Well, that's just basically a good concept to know. Malthusianism, it's in play. These are the origins of the population question, which eventually made its way into liberal, technocrat, elitist philosophy. How are we doing here? Okay. Okay, guys, buckle up. Get cozy. We got 21 minutes of Sleepy Joe Biden. Let's get it. Hopefully I'll have some commentary here.
30 a.m. in the morning. A man smashed the back windows and broke into the home of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the third highest ranking official in America. He carried in his backpack zip ties, duct tape, rope, and a hammer. As he told the police, he had come looking for Nancy Pelosi, to take her hostage, to interrogate her, to threaten to break her kneecaps. But she wasn't there. Her husband, my friend Paul Pelosi, was home alone. The assailant tried to take Paul hostage. He woke him up. He wanted to tie him up. The assailant ended up using a hammer to smash Paul's skull. Thankfully, by the grace of God, Paul survived. All this happened after the assault. And it's hard to even say. It's hard to even say. After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol on January the 6th, when they broke windows, kicked in the doors, brutally attacked law enforcement, roamed the corridors, hunting for officials, and erected gallows to hang the former Vice President, Mike Pence. It was an enraged mob that had been whipped up into a frenzy.
I think a lot of conservative men at this point, we're to a point where if a happening requires an address from the president, it was probably some sort of a setup or a false flag. I think that's where a lot of people are at these days. Like, we just don't trust shit that goes on. January 6th was a setup. This is a setup. Everything's a setup, dude. It's an understandable place to be.
By a president repeating over and over again the big lie that the election of 2020 had been stolen. It's a lie that fueled the dangerous rise in political violence and voter intimidation over the past 2 years. Even before January the 6th, we saw election officials and election workers in a number of states subject to menacing calls, physical threats, even threats to their very lives. In Georgia, for example, the Republican Secretary of State and his family were subjected to death threats because he refused to break the law and give in to the defeated president's demand, just find him 11,780 votes. Just find me 11,780 votes. Election workers, like Shay Moss and her mother Ruby Freeman, were harassed and threatened just because they had the courage to do their job and stand up for the truth, to stand up for our democracy. This institution, this intimidation, this violence against Democrats, Republicans, and nonpartisan officials just doing their jobs are the consequence of lies told for power and profit, lies of conspiracy and malice, lies repeated over and over to generate a cycle of anger, hate, vitriol, and even violence. In this moment, we have to confront those lies with the truth. The very future of our nation depends on it. My fellow Americans, we're facing a defining moment, an inflection point. We must, with one overwhelming, unified voice.
Basically, some crazy broke in, and it doesn't have anything to do. This is like the biggest theme with this country, guys, is like, okay, let's say for a second, let's consider that none of these are false flags, okay? The school shootings. There's some fucking people out there who are sickos, who are wackos. Like, I'm just going to say this straight up, dude. How many sexless guys are out there today? They're saying that like maybe a third of men are not in relationships anymore. And then how many school shooters have there been? Like 5. So 5 out of a third of the male population. I mean, if you're going to look at those statistics, then we need to look at the 1330. And I'm not even being facetious or like racist, or that's just what it is, dude. If you're going to look out of like 5 people out of every 250 million or whatever, then we gotta look at 13% out of 30% of the, or we gotta look at 30% out of 13% of the population. That simply can't be ignored if we're gonna look at these incel statistics. So it's just like, and then there's this like this lone wacko who breaks into a politician's home, and then following it by a few days, there's an address to the nation. I mean, how many home invasions are there in the history of this country? Is there an address to the nation every time there's a home invasion? Because shit happens, dude. When I was living in Vegas, I was really sketched out about the crime there. Man, these fucking group of like 4, future doctors and engineers broke into a kid's home, tied him up in the fucking living room, and executed him. And you know what they took from the house? His fucking PlayStation. This guy got his door kicked in by 4 future engineers and doctors, and they fucking tied this kid up in his living room. He must have been like 19 or something, and executed him and took his fucking PS2. Okay? Was there an address to the nation after that? No. There's home invasions all the time. But no, when it happens to Precious Pelosi, oh, we need an address to the nation. And what is this going to amount? This is going to amount to more totalitarian police state horse shit. People are going to lose their rights because of this one wacko who is probably a fucking undercover Fed.
Speak as a country and say there's no place for voter intimidation or political violence in America, whether it's directed at Democrats or Republicans. No place, period. No place ever. I speak today near Capitol Hill, near the U.S. Capitol, the citadel of our democracy. I know there's a lot at stake in these midterm elections. From our economy, to the safety of our streets, to our personal freedoms, the future of health care, Social Security, Medicare, it's all important. But we'll have our differences. We'll have our difference of opinion. And that's what it's supposed to be. But there's something else at stake. democracy itself. I'm not the only one who sees it. Recent polls have shown that overwhelming majority of Americans believe our democracy is at risk, that our democracy is under threat. They too see that democracy is on the ballot this year, and they're deeply concerned about it. So today, I appeal to all Americans, regardless of party, to meet this moment.
The working definition of democracy in this country is everything good. Okay, I definitely noticed this when I was taking my Constitution class at UNLV. Like, it's just a staple in the textbooks. Democracy is good. It's not open. This is something that's just kind of like snuck into our education, and most people don't question it. We're taught as children that everything good is represented by democracy. Everything bad is not democracy. Like, you're not really able to say, okay, let's take a look at all these different systems of politics and let's decide which one we think is the best. Like, we are all taught that democracy is the best. And right now he's talking about how we're losing our democracy and the issue of democracy, like what? So if there's a home invasion on a politician, that means that we're losing our democracy? Maybe it's people trying to fight for democracy. Maybe we're already losing our democracy, and that's a fight for it. But in reality, I've said it a number of times, this country is the result of real democracy. You hear it in the quotes of the greats, much, much, much before Hitler. Aristotle said that, strong republics give way to weak democracies that give way to corrupt despotisms. I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing. This is the result of democracy. The country's divided in the half. Half the country disagrees and hates the other half of the country. And the political parasites, take advantage of it. Hitler called them the democracy makers, and he obviously said that they were the Jews, but it's much more than that. They really are the democracy makers, and it's the Anglo-American establishment. It's the mercantile class. It's bad news bears.
Of national and generational importance. We must vote, knowing what's at stake and not just the policy of the moment, but institutions that have held us together as we sought a more perfect union are also at stake. We must vote knowing who we have been, what we're at risk of becoming. Look, my fellow Americans, the old expression, freedom is not free. It requires constant vigilance. From the very beginning, nothing has been guaranteed about democracy in America. Every generation has had to defend it, protect it, preserve it, choose it. For that's what democracy is. It's a choice, a decision of the people.
Every generation had to get sent to their death by a bunch of war hawk neocons.
By the people and for the people. The issue couldn't be clearer in my view. We, the people, must decide whether we will have fair and free elections, and every vote counts. We, the people, must decide whether we're going to sustain a republic where reality is accepted, the law is obeyed, and your vote is truly sacred. We, the people, must decide whether the rule of law...
Where reality is accepted. And what is reality? Whatever the Operation Mockingbird CIA-controlled news matrix says. Whatever the floating Jesuit head Dr. Fauci says. That's reality. And if you reject that, that's not free speech. You're not accepting reality.
...prevail, whether we'll allow the dark forces to thirst for power, put ahead of the principles that we've long guided us. American democracy is under attack because the defeated former president of the United States refused to accept the results of the 2020 election. He refuses to accept the will of the people. He refuses to accept the fact that he lost. He has abused his power and put the loyalty to himself before loyalty to the Constitution. And he's made a big lie, an article of faith in the MAGA Republican Party.
And so here's an excuse to talk all this, because ultimately this address to the nation is about Nancy Pelosi. So let's go over this old blah, blah, blah. Let's beat the dead horse of January 2021. Let's beat the dead horse of, Trump. Like, let's beat a bunch of dead horses because we have an excuse to now because of this random home invasion.
The minority of that party. The great irony about the 2020 election is that it's the most attacked election in our history. And yet, there's no election in our history that we can be more certain of its results. Every legal challenge that could have been brought was brought. Every recount that could have been undertaken was undertaken. Every recount confirmed the results. Wherever fact or evidence had been demanded, the big lie has been proven to be just that, a big lie, every single time. Yet now, extreme MAGA Republicans aim to question not only the legitimacy of past elections, but elections being held now and into the future. The extreme MAGA element of the Republican Party, which is a minority of that party, as I said earlier, but is its driving force, is trying to succeed where they failed in 2020, to suppress the right of voters and subvert the electoral system itself. That means denying your right to vote and deciding whether your vote even counts. Instead of waiting until an election is over, they're starting well before it. They're starting now. They've emboldened violence and intimidation of voters and election officials. It's estimated that there are more than 300 election deniers on the ballot all across America this year. We can't ignore the impact this is having on our country. It's damaging, it's corrosive, and it's destructive. And I want to be very clear. This is not about me. It's about all of us. It's about what makes America, America. It's about the durability of our democracy. For democracies are more than a form of government. They're a way of being, a way of seeing the world, a way that defines who we are, what we believe, why we do what we do. Democracy is simply that fundamental. We must, in this moment, dig deep within ourselves and recognize that we can't take democracy for granted any longer. With democracy on the ballot, we have to remember these first principles. Democracy means the rule of the people, not the rule of monarchs or the moneyed, but the rule of the people. Autocracy is the opposite of democracy. It means the rule of one person, one interest, one ideology, one party. To state the obvious, the lives of billions of people from antiquity till now have been shaped by the battle between these competing forces.
And this is where Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent comes in. I'm definitely going to have to read that at some point. I just find the title itself so useful because that's what democracy is all about. Manufacturing consent. This is the manufactured idea that has, that the left is choosing from their free will. The climate control, climate change, LGBTQ, feminism, anti-family type of stuff, homosexual agenda. This has all been manufactured to make the people think that this is what they want. And it is what they want, but they're the masses. They're the masses and their consent's being manufactured.
Between the aspirations of the many and the greed and power of the few. Between the people's right for self-determination and the self-seeking autocrat. Between the dreams of a democracy and the appetites of an autocracy. What we're doing now is going to determine whether democracy will long endure. It, in my view, is the biggest of questions. Whether the American system that prizes the individual, bends towards justice, and depends.
Basically, the people are questioning us, and that's not democracy. Democracy is when no one questions the system, no one questions anything. We're losing our democracy because people are questioning.
Depends on the rule of law, whether that system will prevail. This is a struggle we're now in. A struggle for democracy. A struggle for decency and dignity. A struggle for prosperity and progress. A struggle for the very soul of America itself. Make no mistake, democracy is on the ballot for all of us. We must remember that democracy is a covenant. We need to start looking out for each other.
This is like the equivalent of country music for like conservative rednecks. Like that song on South Park, it's like, and you go to 9/11, 9/11, and they're all crying. It's like some cheesy dramatic song about 9/11. This is like the liberal equivalent of that. Every time he says democracy, yeah, democracy, democracy, I love my democracy. Every time I look at that flag, democracy, just that word democracy is just, it's just dead to me. It doesn't mean anything to me. It certainly doesn't mean anything good to me at this point. This is just virtue signaling about democracy. He's just going to say democracy over and over and over again, and it's so powerful every time he says it. We're losing our democracy. Democracy's on the ballot. We're protecting democracy. He said it again. Democracy. We need our democracy. It's some empty-headed fucking lemming chant as we're all like rushed off of the cliff to this transhumanist nightmare. They'll just be chanting democracy the entire time. It doesn't fucking mean anything at this point. It's just be a good boy, eat your slop and do whatever the news says.
Seeing ourselves as we the people, not as entrenched enemies. This is a choice we can make. Disunion and chaos are not inevitable. There's been anger before in America. There's been division before in America. But we've never given up on the American experiment. We can't do that now.
The American experiment. We've never given up on the American experiment. And we certainly can't now. We got to keep the experiment going. I can't even fucking believe he said that. The American experiment. We can't stop now. There's more progress to be had. Yikes.
Now, the remarkable thing about American democracy is this. Just enough of us, on just enough occasions, have chosen not to dismantle democracy, but to preserve democracy. We must choose that path again. Because democracy is on the ballot, we have to remember that even in our darkest moments, there are fundamental values and beliefs that unite us as Americans. And they must unite us now. What are they? Well, I think first, we believe the vote in America is sacred, to be honored, not denied, respected, not dismissed, counted, not ignored. A vote is not a partisan tool to be counted when it helps your candidates and tossed aside when it doesn't. Second, we must, with an overwhelming voice, stand against political violence and voter intimidation, period. Stand up and speak against it. We don't settle our differences in America with a riot, a mob, or a bullet, or a hammer. We settle them peaceably at the ballot box. We have to be honest with ourselves, though. We have to face this problem. We can't turn away from it. We can't pretend it's just going to solve itself. There's an alarming rise in the number of our people in this country condoning political violence or simply remaining silent, because silence is complicity. The disturbing rise of voter intimidation, the pernicious tendency to excuse political violence, or at least trying to explain it.
Yeah, voter intimidation, kind of like when Antifa was standing outside of the entrance of Donald Trump's inauguration speech, throwing piss and shit at people trying to go inside to watch it. Kind of like when Antifa fucking burnt down a Wendy's. Kind of like when Black Lives Matter was chanting, "We want dead cops, we want dead cops." But you did this one fucking FBI spook op, this fucking bullshit Capitol invasion that you never shut up about, and now there's a problem with political violence. Antifa had been chimping out for fucking 3 years straight up until then. Jeez.
We can't allow this sentiment to grow. We must confront it head on now. It has to stop now. I believe the voices excusing or calling for violence and intimidation are a distinct minority in America, but they're loud and they are determined. We have to be more determined. All of us who reject political violence and voter intimidation, and I believe that's the overwhelming majority of the American people, all of us must unite to make it absolutely clear that violence and intimidation have no place in America. And third, we believe in democracy. That's who we are as Americans.
You see, every time he says democracy, he's like trying to win the Oscar. It's so cheesy every time he says democracy. Oh, he said it again. Wow, it's for democracy. Doesn't fucking mean anything, dude. This country's a joke.
I know it isn't easy. Democracy is imperfect. It always has been. But we are all called to defend it now. History and common sense tell us that liberty, opportunity, and justice thrive in a democracy, not in an autocracy. At our best, America is not a zero-sum society. where for you to succeed, someone else has to fail. The promise of America is big enough. It's big enough for everyone to succeed. Every generation.
But that's literally what democracy is. Someone has to succeed and someone has to fail. Either the Republicans succeed or the Democrats succeed, or the Democrats fail, the Republicans fail. That's exactly what democracy is. That's exactly what it is.
Opening the door of opportunity just a little bit wider. Every generation, including those who have been excluded before. We believe we should leave no one behind, because each one of us is a child of God. And every person is sacred. If that's true, then every person's rights must be sacred as well. Individual dignity, individual worth, individual determination. That's America. That's democracy. And that's what we have to defend. Look, even as I speak here tonight, 27 million people have already cast their ballot in the midterm elections. Millions more will cast their ballots in the final days leading up to November the 8th. And for the first time, this is the first time since the national election of 2020, once again, we're seeing record turnout all over the country. And that's good. We want Americans to vote. We want every American's voice to be heard. Now we have to move the process forward. We know that more and more ballots are cast in early voting or by mail in America. And we know that many states don't start counting those ballots until after the polls close on November 8th. That means in some cases we won't know the winner of the election for a few days after the election. It takes time to count all legitimate ballots in a legal and orderly manner. It's always been important for citizens in democracy to be informed and engaged. Now it's important for citizens to be patient as well. That's how it's supposed to work. This is also the first election since the events of January 6th, when the armed angry mob stormed the U.S. Capitol.
Oh my gosh, January 6th, democracy, democracy, democracy. January 6th, democracy, democracy, democracy. Empty words, guys. Talking heads, empty words. Learn about the Anglo establishment, learn about the mercantile class, Malthusianism, the secret societies, the CIA. This guy's just a puppet. Just, oh my gosh, January 6th, democracy, democracy, democracy. It's just empty fucking words. It's just a waste of time.
I wish I could say the assault on our democracy had ended that day, but I cannot. As I stand here today, there are candidates running for every level of office in America, for governor, Congress, Attorney General, Secretary of State, who won't commit. They will not commit to accepting the results of elections that they're running in. This is a path to chaos in America. It's unprecedented. It's unlawful. And it's un-American. As I've said before, you can't love your country only when you win. This is no ordinary year. So I ask you to think long and hard about the moment we're in. In a typical year, we're often not faced with questions of whether the vote we cast will preserve democracy or put us at risk. But this year we are. This year, I hope you'll make the future of our democracy an important part of your decision to vote and how you vote. I hope you'll ask a simple question of each candidate you might vote for. Will that person accept the legitimate will of the American people, the people voting in his district or her district? Will that person accept the outcome of the election, win or lose? The answer to that question is vital. And in my opinion, it should be decisive. On the answer to that question hangs the future of the country we love so much and the fate of the democracy that has made so much possible for us. Too many people have sacrificed too much.
You know, honestly, bro, you're probably going to lose to Trump in the next election, so yeah, you're going to win the Oscar, buddy. Democracy, democracy, democracy. January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. Yeah, you won the Oscar, buddy. You're probably going to lose the next election.
Much for too many years for us to walk away from the American project in democracy. Because we've enjoyed our freedoms for so long, it's easy to think they'll always be with us no matter what. But that isn't true today. In our bones, we know democracy is at risk. But we also know this. It's within our power, each and every one of us, to preserve our democracy. And I believe we will. I think I know this country. I know we will. You have the power. It's your choice. It's your decision. The fate of the nation, the fate of the soul of America lies where it always does, with the people, in your hands, in your heart, and your ballot. My fellow Americans, We'll meet this moment. We just need to remember who we are. We are the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. May God bless those standing guard over our democracy. Thank you, and Godspeed.
Democracy's on the ropes. I want to defeat democracy. What we should protect is reasonable discourse and mediated sound diplomacy. Hope someone plays this back after the elections. Real. My vote will count on Tuesday. We got a tough job over here, gang. It's not easy over here. We are the contrarians. We stand against the indoctrinated masses. Joe Biden even admits that this is an experiment. The American experiment must continue. I think it's about time to shut it down. Well, my friends, let's watch a couple of videos. 10 top Christians in science on science and faith. Why science hasn't disproved Christianity. Now, I did not pre-watch these videos. I have no idea what's going to be said here. Let's see what's popping.
We are here to talk about big questions. Maybe the biggest question of all. Does God exist? I won't give you a proof tonight, but I hope I will give you some things to think about. Things that have led me from being an atheist to becoming a believer and a follower of Jesus.
Perhaps the most widespread fundamental assumption in the intellectual West today is that there is no reality beyond what natural science discovers, and that there is no authority or good higher than the freedom of the individual. Now, both science and individual freedom are good, but followers of Jesus, like me, have a different view. We believe that both the deepest reality and the highest moral meaning, or good, or authority, are to be found in loving relationship.
Why is nature regular? Why does it follow regular laws? Why can we understand them? And we're so used to these ideas today that we don't realize that they weren't actually that obvious to most people through most time. And the reason for that is that if you just live in the natural world, it doesn't seem to be always that regular. It seems to be capricious. It changes itself all the time. And so what you can show, I think quite decisively historically, is that these ideas, these metaphysical underpinnings of science, uniformity, regularity, intelligibility, have deep theological roots. Their roots go back to a long history of theological reflection on a God who is faithful and sustains the world, therefore, in a regular way.
But just simply the idea that the universe could be expanding, not sort of expanding into something, but just that the space-time metric changes and that there could be a beginning of time is just incredible. I mean, if you go back to before Einstein's work and you go to Newtonian world, there's basically a coordinate system. There's X, Y, and Z, and T, right? And these are just fixed, and things happen in this grid, and you describe physical processes and events by putting them in this grid. And the idea that the universe was changing is just completely ludicrous to many people. And then along comes Einstein, and now we realize that space-time not only can expand and contract, but through the work of Hubble, it actually is. The universe is expanding, and so if you play it back, there was a time when the universe was incredibly small and tiny. That to me is just mind-boggling, and it actually adds to my
absolute science midwit goy slop. Like, wow, it's just crazy to think about how the universe keeps expanding. I'm going to have to roll up my sleeves and really try to dig into Einstein at some point. People in my circles, people in the Wolfgang circles, they don't really have positive things to say about Einstein. More expanding universe. Yeah, bro, you should probably learn about history and theology and things that affect your life. We're never going to experience the expanding universe. It's freaking dumb.
Confidence that the creation story has some merit.
I certainly have colleagues who speak very much the way I used to speak. How can you believe in something that you can't, prove mathematically or show in this way? And in fact,
can't prove God mathematically. I mean, dude, it's just, it's so It's so fedora, neckbeard, anime, Reddit. It's just so cringe, dude. You can't prove God mathematically. The way these people think is just very soyed. It's very manipulated by soy.
A friend of mine who's a mathematician used to say that to me. How can you believe in something that you can't prove? I only believe in things I can prove. And then one day he was reading a history book, and his friend, who happened to be a Christian, said, why are you reading that history book? You can't prove any of that. And he realized there's a lot of truth that has happened in the past that we can't prove today like you can a mathematical thing. And furthermore, of course, all of our science and our math rest upon axioms and things that we take at faith. So people who think that they can't deal with faith are really just deceiving themselves.
So what I'm fond of saying, and I'll say it again tonight, is I don't have the faith to be an atheist. To me, the universe does require an explanation. The philosopher's very ancient question of why is there something rather than nothing is still a valid question. And as many people, including physicist Paul Davies, have pointed out, the laws of physics themselves demand an explanation.
This guy's a Chad. I like everything this guy's saying. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Based. This guy would fuck you up in like 3 seconds. I mean, he looks, he's a little bit older. I don't know. He looks like he's kind of a burly dude, but aside from his physical capabilities, this guy's a Chad.
That stands somehow out of science. Whether that is a physical explanation or a spiritual explanation, nature is not self-explanatory. And ultimately, if I had to tell someone why I am a theist, it is because precisely I think that nature, as we see it, requires an explanation. And the more we know of the world from science, the more it begs that explanation.
I start by saying there is a God who created the universe, and he's not an impersonal God. He has declared himself as a loving God who seeks a relationship with us and also gives us free will to choose him or not. And our purpose then is found in being in relationship with him.
The order and structure of the natural laws, to me, suggests a God who ordained and conceived those laws. The astonishing complexity of living things, to me, suggests an architect who cares about those things. The fact that there is something rather than nothing suggests the existence of a creator of that something. And indeed, one of the joys I have in studying the natural sciences is that I learn a little bit about what God has done. And in the process, I think I come to understand a little bit of what he is like. He is much bigger, much grander, much more awesome, much more majestic than I would have previously imagined.
See, science, it provides a set of tools that are useful for investigating phenomena in the natural world. But as powerful as it may be for dissecting planetary motion and battling cancer, it's not really intended for questions like, why did life forms originate in the first place? And we're free to speculate, opine, and have our beliefs, but science is not equipped to answer questions like this. This doesn't itself mean, let me be clear here, that there is an answer somewhere else. It just means that we have to be faithful to what science is, and that we can't extend the purview of science beyond what it is capable of addressing.
The Lord led me to genetics, and I don't have time to get into that story, but it's a fascinating story, how he led me to genetics. It was not what I had planned to do, but my goodness, I'm so happy I did. I can't imagine myself doing anything else, but I see it all as part of his plan to lead me to that and to help me to see identity in a whole different way. And when I think about my own identity, I think of Christ and how he created us. He created us in his image, so we had identity with him. And then we sinned, and his grace, we talk about grace, his grace, through his grace, he wanted to bring us back in relationship with him and to bring us back in identity with him.
All right, well, I actually enjoyed that overall. Eric's upset because I made fun of the expanding universe. Is the universe expanding? Yeah, buddy, you did a good job. The universe keeps growing. It's big. Yeah, buddy. Universe just keeps getting bigger, buddy. You did a good job, buddy. I painted a picture of the universe. It keeps getting bigger. Good job, buddy. All right. I'm a Christian currently pursuing a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, and my scientific studies have brought me closer to the Lord our God, not farther away. I delight in exploring the mysteries of his creation, and the more I discover, the more my breath is taken away. His creativity and intellect are unmatched. Praise be to the Lord. Amen. I'm a Christian and I love science. Science is basically a logical explanation for God's creations. Sometimes it's just a fucking lie. I don't have the faith to be an atheist. Wow, one of the most profound one-liners I've heard in quite a while. It's a good one. That's a good line. I love hearing them all being encouraging and talking about Jesus because as a Christian, yes, it's hard for me to talk about Jesus sometimes, but it's even harder for them because they are in a science community and they're more likely to be persecuted. But I love what that last person said about how God led her to do science, and she said she knows it all part of his plan, and I truly believe that God will use anything to help us share his glory to other people. All right, my friends, last video, why science hasn't disproved Christianity. Zondervan, let's go.
Hasn't science disproved Christianity? We used to live in the dark ages where we believed in unicorns, fairy godmothers, and goblins.
Halt! Who goes there? A based Australian Asian man blocks your path. And go.
But then science came along and it rescued us from superstition and our age of darkness. And so if we want to believe in a God, aren't we going back to the dark ages where we also believe in unicorns and leprechauns and fairy godmothers? Hasn't science disproved Christianity? And science has given us so many good things, from microwave ovens to mobile phones. So you can't have it both ways. If you want to enjoy the microwave oven, you can't also believe in God at the same time. Well, to answer this, I say this: I am of the science. And it's amazing how many scientists also believe in a supernatural personal God. So there's nothing incompatible about science and believing in God. It's actually the way we understand science that's the problem. There are many things we believe and we know to be true that don't come to us from science. We all believe that it's good to give to those who are less fortunate than us. We all believe that it's wrong for us to discriminate against marginalized people groups. We all believe it's wrong for a powerful person to commit violence upon a weaker person. We all know these things to be true, but how do we know them to be true? Science can't prove any of those things to us, and yet we know and believe them to be true. In other words, there's so much in this life that we believe and know to be true, they don't come to us from science. It's the same with Jesus and faith and spirituality. They can be true even though they don't come to us from science. For example, when I come home and my wife says, "I love you," what do I do with that? Do I say to her, "Prove it. Give me a scientific, repeatable, observable experiment that proves that you love me"? See, that would be ridiculous because love belongs in a different metaphysical category. So I believe she loves me, I know she loves me, but it's based on trust and testimony and personal experience. And we know there is a Jesus who's alive and is true, not because only of science, but because it's a metaphysical claim and it comes to us through other truth sources like trust and testimony and personal experience. And also to say, hey, there can't be a God because science explains everything is a bit like me going, "Hey, psst, I worked out something. Bananas come from banana trees, so there can't be a God." And you'll be going, "Whoa, I don't get that at all. That is a category mistake. That is a logical non sequitur. Just because you know bananas come from banana trees doesn't mean there is no God." Well, that's exactly the same as saying, "Hey, I know the origins of the universe. I know the origins of life. Therefore, there is no God." No, that is a category mistake because we can have multiple causations. That's what John Lennox says. We can have a supernatural personal agency and a physical causation story at the same time. And so John Lennox uses the example of a cake, a birthday cake that his aunt has baked him. And he says, what has caused his birthday cake? Well, at a scientific, physical level, it's eggs, flour, butter. but at a personal level, it's his aunt. And at a purpose relational level, it's because his aunt loves him. And it's the same with the origins of the universe and life. We can say, hey, I have a physical scientific explanation, but we also have a supernatural personal explanation, God, and we have a purpose relational explanation. God made this universe and he gave us life because he loves us. So you see that God and science are complementary rather than competing.
Good stuff. Well, all I'll say about those videos is I figured that at least one or two people would be taking the easy way out. Darwinism is false. We did not evolve from amoeba fish. I say that confidently with every ounce of my being. I don't even hesitate. I don't even question it. This is Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. This is a very popular modern, like Baptist, more or less reformed systematic theology. I don't agree with a lot of what's in here. This book takes the easy way out on young Earth versus old Earth. It takes somewhat of a neutral stance and it kind of like takes like a passive aggressive piss on the old Earth or the young Earthers, whilst kind of like nonchalantly endorsing old Earth. But this book straight out says like Darwinism is not Christian. So what I'm trying to say is it's a very mainstream view. It's really not that controversial to deny Darwin. It was shoved down our throats by public school teachers who, you know, a lot of times at best have like a master's degree in general education, but you know, they're just getting college drive-through bachelor's degrees in education. I don't mean to belittle them. It's just that when this kind of like cult of public school academia is trying to force feed us this liberal Christianity, and you know, that's just if you won't accept liberal atheism, it needs to stop. Darwinism is a farce. Old Earth, old universe, Big Bang is a farce. No more cucking out, boys. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. People were created by God in God's image. It's important. Well, don't you think that God could have made evolution? No. No, because we did not evolve from monkeys. We did not evolve from amoeba or monkey amoeba. We were created in the image of God, and these animals were put on Earth to be, you know, for us. We are the dominant species made in the image of God. We are different. There's a reason that people have dominated and cultivated and taken dominion over the earth. We are not the same as the animals. You're believing a lie if you believe in Darwinism. So that's pretty much it for today, guys. Other than that, you know, just stay cozy, keep it going, be a little bit productive, but be a little bit cozy. I actually started today off pretty good. Got out of bed at a decent time, got my groceries, taking care of business, working it out. Life is good. So thank you guys for making another great podcast. I imagine we'll be drinking coffee tomorrow, doing a little chill stream or what have you. I'm kind of just getting through, man, watching the days go by. I'm ready for 2013. Aren't we all ready for 2013? What I'm really ready for is 2023. I'm ready for 2013, baby. Well, how about 2023? I'm not so sure if I'm ready for that, actually. I read somewhere that the medieval church said fairies were neutral angels who didn't take sides with God or the devil. Interesting. God bless you, my friends. Thank you for being here with me today, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace out, guys.